Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Fell Into Food podcast, soon to be the #1 food podcast in the world. I said it. With me today is a man who spent nearly 2 decades mastering the global supply chain for giants like Unilever, managing portfolios worth over $1.4 billion with a B dollars. But just a few months ago in August, he walked away from the corporate safety net to start his own company, Elevate Growth Partners. He is a chemical engineer who finds actual joy in the logistics of mayonnaise, a former Ultimate Frisbee coach who knows how to build a team, and he joins us today fresh from his recent move to Mexico City. Please welcome Pedrom Rejai.
Great. Nice to be here, Jeff. Thanks for the nice intro.
There's a lot of ways we could start this conversation. I'm going to start with chemical engineering degree from University of Nebraska. When I think engineer, especially chemical hard hats, oil refineries, that kind of route, how in the world did you fall into food? What was your fell into food moment of getting into the food industry?
I love it. So you probably don't think of food industry with chemical engineering because you didn't go to school in Nebraska. But in Nebraska, everything is food related because that's the industry of Nebraska. And so actually at my university, many people ended up working at Cargill and ADM and other giant food corporations, especially chemical engineers, as sometimes it's weird to say it, sometimes it's okay to say it, but food cooking is chemistry at the end of the day. And so my chemical engineering degree applied to the food industry much more than I thought. And I quite literally fell into it when Cargill recruited me for an internship. And I ended up in a corn milling factory. And I thought I was going to hate it, to be honest. And it went completely other direction. I loved being in a food factory. It was a blast. It was so fun to play with all the giant equipment, figure out how corn and corn starch and corn syrup and all those things were really made. It's a different discussion later, maybe in this podcast, on if that corn milling is actually a good thing for our food industry or not. But at the end of the day, I really enjoyed learning how food production worked, especially at mass scale, and got really interested in working in manufacturing on the food side of it. And a lot of my friends did go to the oil industry. They may have gotten paid a little more, but they had a lot less fun than I did. That's for sure.
All right. I have to bring this up first thing because it's all I've been thinking about since we had our intro call. Mayonnaise. Mayonnaise. It's eggs, it's oil, it's really not that much, but it really is. You worked on it for years. When I just say the word mayo, just start talking.
First, I get a big smile on my face because I loved working in a mayonnaise factory. Just for some context, I worked at the Hellmann's factory for Unilever. It's actually in Chicago. So fun fact, not a well-known fact, but a fun fact, 95% of North America's Hellmann's mayonnaise is made in Chicago. So in the actual city. So if you want to talk about made in America, number one, it's Hellmann's. Made by a union workforce for the last 100+ years, it's Hellmann's. It was a wonderful brand to work on because it really was made by the people of Chicago for the whole United States and Canada. But working on mayonnaise was a blast because that factory puts out, I'm sure you know Hellmann's and Best Foods. It's the #1 brand in North America. Another fun fact, condiments. Mayonnaise specifically is the #1 condiment in the world. And so when you talk about...
I did not know that.
Yeah. #1 condiment in the world. Now, in the US, we don't eat it quite as much, but in Europe and other places, you put mayonnaise on French fries, you put it on everything. But then think about how much mayonnaise you put on all your sandwiches here. It's everywhere. And so by volume, mayonnaise is #1 condiment. And by volume, we put out over 2 million pounds a day in that factory. 2 million pounds a day.
Holy shit. That is a lot of freaking mayonnaise.
A lot of mayonnaise, more than I ever thought I'd see in my life. And my job there was actually to engineer bigger, better, more efficient ways to make the mayonnaise. So quite literally, I was building big tanks for soybean oil. I was automating the mixing process for mayonnaise. I was rehabbing the mills that actually whip the mayonnaise, and many other things, bringing new formulas to the factory, scaling them up for full production, all sorts of really fun stuff at the plant.
Yeah, because you actually led a project to vertically integrate egg blending, correct?
That's correct. And so like mayonnaise, as you know, normally you make it at home, you just crack some eggs and whip it up, right? But Hellmann's is a little better than that. They add egg yolk in. So it's egg white, egg yolk from a normal whole egg, and then plus a little more egg yolk based on the different types of formulas. And so we would have to bring in different percentage of yolk versus whites. That would be cracked and blended, first separated and blended at the egg supplier's factory, which was in Wisconsin, local eggs, great. And That blending process was a little bit of extra work for them. Plus, it made it not a commodity process. So it was customized for the Hellmann's factory. And so what we did is we said, well, why can't we just blend that here in the plant? It gives us more flexibility for different formulas because we were buying different blends of eggs for different formulas. And it helps us save a bit of money in the process because now we can buy a commoditized egg. So it reduces risk. So when for example, when the avian flu crisis happened, it was really difficult to get eggs from specific places. And then if you were to go to a new egg supplier and say, actually, I need you to blend this specific amount, they'd say, no, we are too constrained on supply. We won't do anything special. And so by vertically integrating, we did a few things. We saved some money because we could buy commoditized. We reduced risk in the supply chain because now many suppliers could provide that type of egg. And we increased flexibility in the plant because we could do multiple formulas from the same egg type coming in. So it's a really cool project, but as you can imagine, we can't shut down this mayonnaise factory. It was making so much every day. It was 24/7. And so we had to install an egg blending system while the factory was running and start it up while the factory was running. Yeah. It's as crazy as it sounds.
How does that even work? If you've got a project like your normal facility's up and running, is it you're updating lines on the floor? Is it like an add-on that's being built while the product? Like, how does that even work?
Yeah, so in the process area, there is 6, 8 giant tanks for eggs in that process area. And so you'd fill those up with eggs. What we would do is we would install the new process equipment near it. We would do some trials on it where we just basically go to the drain with water or something else. And then when we were ready to trial with actual eggs, you would have a hose that runs from that equipment into those big egg tanks. So you basically just like bolt it on to one side. Once you trial it enough and you feel really confident in it, then you plan a downtime event. So you schedule downtime. You usually get 6 hours, 8 hours, sometimes 16 hours. You do all the hard piping, all the programming in that very short period of time. And then when you go to start up, you have to have everybody standing there on the line ready to deal with problems because every time you start up after a shutdown, there are problems. So it is exactly as crazy as it sounds, where you are changing the engine on a car while you're driving it.
That's insane to try and do something of that magnitude. How much was it to do so I guess the question is, when does it make sense to do like vertical integration? You always hear vertical integration, like Amazon, they're vertically integrating. This company's vertically integrating. What does vertical integration mean, just so people have context? And then at what point does the tipping scale that you say, okay, I think the math and the numbers check out, so we should probably go to that way? Or do a lot of companies, are they still like, no, we'll just outsource it because it's just too much work?
Yeah, that's the last part I think is the key point. So when you're thinking about vertical integration as a company, you usually want to start with a few key questions. The first and most important one is, do we have the skills to operate this ourselves? That's usually the hardest one for people to answer, but in my opinion, it's the most important one, which is it adjacent to what your team can already do? In the case of egg blending, our team was already blending eggs with spices and other things. So check that box. Yes, the team can definitely blend eggs because they can blend spices with eggs and make mayonnaise. So yeah, they can probably blend eggs. If I was saying you're bringing in blended eggs into maybe a food service place where you're making a bunch of different dishes for different people, okay, then maybe you can't run process equipment to blend eggs. You just don't have that skills there. So then you go into step 2, can you hire it? Do you want to hire it? Start asking those questions. The other part of vertical integration, which is when you're bringing this process into your factory. So you're basically saying, I was hiring a supplier to do this before. Now I'm going to do it myself because I can, for whatever reason. The other next step is, can you actually save money doing it? Your supplier of eggs in this case has a lot more volume than you do because they sell to many customers. You are just one customer. So that means you will inherently have less volume. So you have to ask the question, can I do it at the same cost as my supplier does, or cheaper? Not normally is the answer to that one. In most cases, your suppliers have higher volume, they have higher throughput, they can do it better. So then that leads into the next question, which is there something special about my ingredient that my supplier just doesn't understand, can't do, or I can't find a supplier for? And in our case in egg blending, the answer was no. There was nothing that special. It's eggs. There's whites and egg yolks. There's nothing that great about it. But in other cases, some people have, let's say, an ingredient for a pasta salad that they're putting on a plate with other things. And they have a very specific recipe for that pasta salad, and they have very specific allergen risks for those. Maybe they want to vertically integrate the mixing of that pasta salad so that they reduce the risk of some allergen getting into it. So then there's something special about vertically integrating that piece. Those are the key decision points. Most people, when they think of vertical integration, like I want to bring this part of the process in-house, they just think cost. But really, it's a triangle, right? It's cost, it's capabilities, and it's specialty or customization that you need. You will also start to get into things like resilience. So if there's some disruption that could happen in your supply chain, do you want to be resilient against it? For example, Cargill, most famously, it was probably 10 years ago, started buying their own barge ships to sail on the ocean. They didn't buy a lot of them, but they bought a few of them. And it was a lot of people wondered why. Like they ship a lot of product, but why do they really need to buy barge ships? Well, they bought them because it reduced their risk of having a ship canceled or delayed or whatever else because they had control over it. It wasn't that they could ship stuff cheaper than Maersk or one of the other big shipping companies, it's that they had control over when their corn moved. So if their factory went down for a day, the ship would wait. Whereas if it was another company, the ship wouldn't wait. It would just sail anyways. And so it gave them more resilience to issues that come up and allowed them to service their customers better at the end of the day. So those are kind of
Yeah, it
the
makes
four key pieces to it.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, that's what Amazon did, right? They bought their fleet of trucks versus relying on every other delivery service. They said, screw it. We're just going to buy our own fleet. And then we have full control over what happens. And I think they just ended with USPS, or I saw an article about they're fully taking over their fleet now.
Yep, they are. They're starting to buy up even more trucks. And I love too what they've done with the electric vehicles also. Not only they buy their own trucks, they bought electric ones because they had a big contract and they were able to do that portion of it too. So they installed all the electric chargers at their warehouses and now they can run fully electric.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane what they can. When you have it fully integration, the amount of control, to me, that's what it is like once you figure out all those pain points, you figure out the questions and what you're going to do, you have control of what happens. Your point with the cargo ships, we can just let it wait. We don't have to pay for someone to hold that. It has to go somewhere and then come to us. We have total control over the entire process. Why do you think companies, I know you hit those pillars and those questions, but you don't see a lot of companies, they just say it's easier. We'll go to Asia and outsource it versus they may have the answers to the questions and say, yes, we can do it, but they still outsource.
Yeah, usually outsourcing is another way to reduce the risk of capital spend. So let's say maybe you have the resources to do it yourself, but you would have to invest in your own commercial kitchen, or you would have to buy molds for some product to properly form a bottle. And a lot of factories and manufacturing in Asia already have a lot of those capabilities there. In addition, if you're doing it yourself, you have to know all the art, research and development behind it too. So especially when you're looking at food products, like you have to be able to change the formulation based off of the factory and how it goes. And even if you're making your own commercial kitchen, as the ingredients come in, you have to be able to change those things because there's variability in your inbound supplies. When you go to China or you go to another factory that's already been doing it, they have those capabilities integrated and you can pay for those. And so when you do, first, it's going to be cheaper for them to do it up front because they have volume again. And second, you drastically reduce the risk because they've done it before and you probably haven't, even if you know how to do it. Or they've done it before at scale where you haven't done it necessarily at scale. So those pieces usually go together to form a much easier or lower risk way to start. And then I usually advise businesses that once you get started with China or wherever else you want to source from, yeah, you have more inventory that you have to carry. But as soon as you see the tipping point in your consumers or where you're selling, then you start to think about how do I build this myself? How do I run it myself? And you can do a step-by-step process where you're not as rushed to get it to market because you already have the flow to the market.
That makes sense. So not only reading through your resume, it looks like you did a lot more than just one simple thing at Unilever. Kind of talk through what that was like from where you started to how you ended. I want to kind of take people on that journey that if you find a good company, you can take a good roller coaster ride. And that is not always just this linear path of, well, I did this for, you hear this guy did it for 35 years, which blows my mind how anyone could do one job for 35 years, but people do it. Walk through those steps of where it was started and then kind of how you ended. Because again, at the end of it, managing, was it 400 million that you were managing?
Yeah, $400 million
by the time
business.
you were done? I mean, you got to start somewhere. How does one go from starting to $400 million in business management?
So my career path in Unilever was a really fun, exciting, and many different jobs, I would say. And I want to start it off with Unilever is a wonderful company to learn and to build your own skill set and to try new things. They are truly a people-first company, and I felt it in many of the decisions that they made to help me along my journey. My first job was actually as a project engineer in the Dove bar soap factory outside Chicago. And so I started my career at Unilever making bar soap, quite literally making bar soap as a project engineer, where I was doing projects in the factory with, $50,000, $300,000 budgets to improve that plant. both in the efficiency and the infrastructure in that factory. That went really well. And so within like less than a year, I had gotten a new job doing operations for the engineering team in Unilever North America, where I got to travel from factory to factory, helping the operations team better understand both the systems that we had, the processes that we had, and then share learnings within the different engineers, because there's at the time 14 factories in North America for Unilever, and each of them had a different engineering team that learned different things. And so my job was to help them share those learnings and to put it into a process. I worked myself out of a job in that one. So after about a year and a half, I had done enough processes that they didn't really need me full time. And so my boss, who's a very smart man, had prepped for this moment and put me on a project to help build the Knorr factory in Kansas City, just outside Kansas City. And so I was traveling back and forth between Chicago and Kansas City for a while, doing some of the project engineering there until I landed the role back in the Dove bar soap factory, where I started doing WCM, which is Unilever's version of TPM or continuous improvement. And so I led the continuous improvement implementation in the bar soap factory. That was a super fun job because I got really close to the operation. So every day they're putting out 1,000,000 bars a shift, about more or less. So 1,000,000 bars every 8 hours. And my job was to make that 1,000,001 bars and then 1,000,002 bars and just every day make it a little bit better. That type of continuous improvement mindset is one that has paid dividends to me for my whole career, because you don't need that just in a factory. That continuous improvement can be applied to anything you do, including cooking at home, to making mayonnaise, to even running a service business, to every type of business you could imagine. And so learning the basics of how to do continuous improvement in that role was absolutely fantastic. I got that job because I love to do that kind of work, and that's why I went towards it. As I did that kind of work, I kept performing well, and Unilever, being the company that it was, said, Pedrom, as long as you're performing well, like, we're going to support you with whatever you want to do. So at that point, I got my project management professionals license, which basically was an external certification to say, yeah, he's really good at projects and he knows everything about them. And then I got the role at the Hellmann's factory. So this is all in the first 4 years of Unilever, by the way. So about 4 years in, yeah, I know, that's job number 4 in about 4 years. I moved to the Hellmann's factory in Chicago, where I was the head of engineering for that plant. Got to spend a lot of money to improve the infrastructure of that factory. I did that job for 3 years. That was my longest job at Unilever by far, because Unilever had a methodology of wanting you to learn many different types of roles across the business so that you're better suited to make good, broad decisions. And Unilever's philosophy was then to hire specific experts for very specific purposes. So, for example, through all my engineering days, I don't know how to design a steel beam or how to program an automation tool, but I am really good at finding the experts who do and then managing the project to make sure it actually happens in the factory. And so with that approach, I got really good at learning all these different aspects of engineering and applied them in that role. After I did that job for about 3.5 years, I started stepping in different roles in that leadership team. So I was in safety for a little bit, helping through COVID. I also did a few projects in quality, and then I also helped a global rollout of a software tool for project management in the Unilever engineering team. And then I went into category engineering, where my job was to help the R&D team scale up new formulas, as well as manage all the changes in suppliers and everything that could happen in the dressings business in Unilever North America. And then I finished my MBA. So Unilever was kind enough to sponsor a portion of my MBA. So I was getting my MBA during this time online at University of North Carolina. One of the things I get asked a lot is, why did I get an MBA? Why not just keep going with engineering? Well, I was enjoying engineering a lot, and I was also enjoying all the things next to engineering, which was the business evaluations, the financial models, all those types of things. And I had a really great mentor at the time, which Kelly Shepard, if you're listening, hi, that really encouraged me to keep learning. And so I went back to school to better understand all the aspects of the business, to pick which place I wanted to go into next, with the thought of like, maybe I'll just stay in engineering for the rest of my career. Well, a bad thing happened. I liked all of it. Every single piece. I really enjoyed every aspect of running a business. This will come back full circle once I get to the end of my career, or where we are today. I really enjoyed every aspect of it. So I finished my MBA at that time, and then I found a role that I really wanted in Unilever, which was running strategic planning for their North America beauty business. So I landed that role, and my job was to do long-term capacity planning, project management, and internal consulting for the Unilever North America beauty business, which was about that $1.4 billion portfolio of what they were selling. That's everything from shampoos, conditioners, body wash, a little bit of deodorants, lotions, basically everything in a bottle that you could think of for a beauty brand. And so I would then decide and help decide what factories should run what, how our long-term capacity planning was doing. Because as you can imagine, if volume goes up 3, 4, 5%, something at that scale, you need investment to be able to manage that. You can't just call up a CM and say, okay, tomorrow I want to run 2 million pounds of mayonnaise instead of 1 million pounds today. They can't react that quickly. It's just too high of volume. And so I had to predict the future and then figure out how much it costs to manage that future, and then convince everybody that that's the money we should spend, and then also execute on those projects. So that's essentially what my team did. Actually, one of the most fun jobs I had because I got to see so many aspects of the business. And that was why I took it. I was talking with the general manager, the marketing team, the sales teams, all of them, just to figure out what consumers really wanted and how we had to adjust our supply chain to get there. That role went super well. During this time, I was also helping a friend of mine start his marketing analytics business in the pest control industry because I was just moonlighting and enjoying it, and realized I liked working on smaller businesses. And so my next role was in Unilever International, where I worked on a smaller business of 400 million a year and transitioned into managing the end-to-end supply chain for that business. Now, Unilever International is a completely left turn from typical Unilever. The Unilever you all are probably used to is the one that sells deodorant in your pharmacy or maybe shampoo at the grocery store. But there's another side of Unilever, Unilever International, that's trying to manage the rest and find out what others like. One is go to new geographies. So I was in charge of North America and LATAM, which means I opened new geographies for Unilever and LATAM, places like French Guiana or Haiti or the Bahamas. We would manage geographies that were typically hard to manage from a supply chain perspective and sales perspective. The other thing Unilever International did is they went into adjacent products to the typical brands that we have. So for example, in the US, Vaseline, the little chapstick competitor, that Vaseline lip, Unilever International did that. Now, why did Unilever International do that, not Unilever North America? Because we could harness the power of a very efficient factory in Korea to serve the entire world with those specific Vaseline lip ones. And so UI would do that with that factory in Korea. Meanwhile, Unilever North America would keep making what they're making locally. The other piece that Unilever International did that's very near and dear to my heart is they would serve the diaspora of people who love their Unilever products from home. For example, one of our biggest brands in Central America is Naturas. It's a pasta sauce. And my job was to figure out how to bring Naturas from Costa Rica and Central America to the US. Compliant, sell it, get it distributed, all those things, because the typical Unilever doesn't want to deal with that type of brand, nor should it be listed next to a typical pasta sauce. It needs to be in the ethnic aisle, it needs to be with the other diaspora products, and it needs to be in the places where Central Americans are living, which is not the entire United States. And so Unilever International took care of those aspects. Now, I mentioned those because it gave me a unique perspective on how operating a business really works, because that's a very different business than what Unilever typical is. After I went through operating that for about 3 years, I was seeing all the different aspects of it. I got really deep into the business side and the finance side of things because my job was to make sure that the supply chain ran well and deal with the customers and the customer service and the cash cycle that has to be done with all the supply chain things, how much inventory to hold, how to hold our distributors accountable, all those types of things. Once I started to get through that role, I realized I wanted to keep working with smaller businesses. And so I with my boss's blessing and help, we realized that I could basically chart my path out of Unilever to start my own business. And so we started to talk about what that looks like, how to do it. And with plenty of runway and warning, we figured out the way for my backfill to come in, me to train them, and me to leave and start my own business that's now Elevate Growth Partners. And that happened August 1st of this year, which we're talking in December of 2025. So just five short months ago when I left Unilever to go full-time on my business.
Okay. There's a lot to unpack there.
There's a ton. Yes.
I was literally typing out notes as you were talking because I'm like, I'm not going to remember all this. Okay, let's first go with, you talked about you had a role of having to find specialized people. What does it take to find those roles when, like you said, you're not an expert in that field? What do you have to know in order to find those people? You hear about it all the time with CEOs, and they've got to surround themselves with people who are smarter than them in specific segments. But I hear a lot of founders, they hire the wrong people and they don't know who to hire. What is kind of that process, or what was it that you did to find these specialized people, especially for very niche, large industrial jobs?
First, there's not a lot of people who do large niche industrial jobs. So
okay,
that helps
makes
narrow
it easy
the
to start
down. Yeah. So when you're looking for these specialized people, usually the first step is narrow the market down. And I think that's where a lot of people forget to start. It honestly is like, okay, what's the job I need to do? Do I need to do fulfillment to Amazon? let's say I'm just using a small CPG example. Like, let's say I only want to fulfill by Amazon. Okay, great. Well, that narrows my market of third-party logistics firms. Let's say you're looking for a 3PL to help you with this. Second one is I want to open up D2C. So I want to eventually get on a Shopify channel. Okay, that narrows the pool even more. Third, I want them to be in my general geography. Well, why do you want that? Well, because I want to be able to visit them and take inventory, blah, blah. Okay, that narrows the pool even more. So you just start like layering these onions on to narrow the pool until you get to a smaller pool. And once you get to that smaller pool, typically when you start reaching out and you say, hey, I want to give you money because I want to pay you to do something, people are very responsive and will gladly share their experience with you. And so I, in my second step of evaluating these types of things, would always just ask them how they would solve one of the problems that I have. Give them case studies as much as possible and give them each the same case study and be completely transparent about it. Because as you give them these case studies of a problem to solve, not only will you learn along the way, but you'll see the different approaches to problem solving. And one of the key things that I've learned is as you're looking for people, you need people who have the knowledge, but more important are the people who want to figure out how to solve these problems because they're the ones who will learn along the way. And so by giving them some of these case studies, especially if it's rooted in your own business and with some difficult problems to solve, you'll find out very quickly who those people are who really enjoy solving the types of problems that you have in your factory or in your business or anything else. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, is they have a real passion or desire to do those types of things. And when they do, you're going to get a lot more from it. They're also going to do a lot better. It might take them longer if they don't necessarily have all the knowledge, but they do quite a bit better in the long run. The last and other important piece that I always look for is like, how do we chunk this out? So let's start small so we can get to know each other, so we can check each other's skills, make sure we work together and vibe nicely and both you have the skills and meet expectations and on and on and on. So how do you chunk out the first bit rather than bite off a lot right away? So if you're hiring someone for the first time, let's do a 3-month contract or 6-month contract with monthly check-ins instead of you're full-time, here's all your benefits. No, let's go 1099, or maybe you work part-time. If you're hiring a 3PL for the first time, how do we sign a 2-month agreement just to get started? Or maybe we can do half my volume for the first 6 months. Start to ask those questions is like they're a way to just stare into it because you'll learn so much more once you're actually doing. So lower that risk as much as possible.
Problem solver. That's something I literally wrote down the term problem solver. Do you think through the people you've talked to when you were trying to hire these roles, like people either have it or they don't? Like you said, they may not have all the actual knowledge per se. They obviously have a generalized knowledge of what it is you need. But there's certain people I tend to see that they either like, here's the problem and they figure it out one way or another, come hell or high water. And there's others that are kind of like, they muddle around it and they're like, here's the solution. You're like, you're not even close to what we need. Did you see that with people and their personalities? Is that like some people, they're just, I don't want to say they're born, but they got it in their blood. They figure shit out, and other people just, they don't. And that's okay too.
Yep. I saw that a lot, actually. And you can tease it out pretty quickly with the case study, like I said. But I also want to make a note of the people who maybe aren't problem solvers, but they're great operators. And what do I mean by that? An operator is someone who can do the same job every day and do it with excellence. It's very difficult for someone to do the same 10, 20, 30 tasks every single day without change. And some people are built for that. They may not be built for problem solving. And so one of the aspects I saw as I teased out this type of skill set of like, are you a problem solver, lifelong learner? Are you an operator? Are you somewhere in between? Or do you like to like really just talk to people all day long, which that's a different skill set and important in other parts of the business. Teasing out that personality aspect and then how that fits into the job you're trying to hire for is a very difficult skill, number one. Number two, you'll make lots of mistakes along the way. So that comes back to like, how do you trial before you hire? And then the third piece is you can ask them, as weird as it sounds. Like one of my favorite interview questions is, what do you do in your free time? Or what makes you tick? Or what's your favorite thing to do at work? And usually the answers to those start to tease out like, what's the core of their personality? Like, what do they really enjoy about their job? And someone who's enjoying that part of their job, they're able to live their purpose every day. And your purpose can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But when you're using that and living it every day, you're inherently going to do better at your job.
And that kind of bleeds into as well the continuing improvement. Don't you think it's natural for humans to want to continue to be, I know there are some that don't, but that they want to continue to improve. It's the weird little things. You get a new dishwasher and you're loading dishes and you kind of figure it out for the first time. And then you're like, I think it could have been done this. If we move the cups here, I'm going to try this next time. Until you get it, this little efficiency process and again, maybe this is just me. Again, I think I'm one of those problem solvers. We're both in the same Myers-Briggs bracket. But do you think humans, as a natural, like they want to be continuously improving, or is that what sets the cream from the crop? Right? You have people who become chefs, right? They're leading teams. That they don't want to potentially do the same thing every day. And then you have others who are line cooks for their entire life or sous chefs because they're doing the same thing and they're not continuously improving.
Yeah, I don't think humans naturally want to continuously improve. I think it is dependent heavily on the person and their personality. And I also think that you or I might be biased in our assessment because we naturally find others who are like us. That, I think, is a very human thing to do, is that you seek your community that is like you because it makes you feel at home. And I think that's where naturally humans tend towards, which means those that want to keep improving get into roles like what you or I have done, or maybe worked as a chef, or maybe like to tinker with recipes or tinker with how the dishwasher is loaded or go play on a factory line or something. But I've met so many people through my work, especially in factories where these are like jobs that are the same every day. And I've met people who drive a forklift for 25 years and they are very happy doing it, honestly. Like I've met a few that came into work smiling, left smiling, and they drove a forklift for 8 hours a day. And all they did was move pallets from the end of one place, put it in a truck. Next one, there, to the truck, to the truck, to the truck, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all day, every day. And they loved it. They frankly loved it, as weird as it sounds. They would work overtime. They were happy every day. I mean, obviously everybody has bad days, but like in general, they were super happy. And so that I can think of one very specific woman in general who was just like, every time I went out to her, she was always super happy on the forklift. And she'd be like, hey, don't interrupt my flow. Like, I'm really happy right now. She would tell me these things. Like, she's just loading pallets and she's like, I'm in my flow state. Like, let me live my life. No headphones, no nothing, just pallet after pallet. And I always think of her when I think of exactly like what you just said. I'm like, no, she loves her life. She wants to keep doing that. She doesn't want it to change because every day she knows what time she gets off work and she knows she goes home. She hangs out with her family. She sees her friends, plays pickleball, who knows what else, and then comes back the next day and does it again and knows what to expect. And so those people can bring just as much value as those that want to improve every day. I think the hardest part as a leader, especially, is finding the right place for each person. Because if you swap those two, they are both going to fail at their respective jobs.
Yeah.
So how do you place them in the right place for them to thrive?
And to your point, it's having an honest conversation with them, being honest and blunt. I know you say like somebody who comes in just does it. I had a dishwasher who literally had been at the same place, I think 30 years. It was like 30 or 35 years doing the same thing. Nothing different. I mean, the dish room may change, the equipment might change, but he washed dishes for 30 years in the same kitchen. And I said straight up to him, I'm like, you've got some great organizational skills. You clearly know what you're doing. Do you want to be, like steward lead? And he goes, no. And I'm like, what? And he goes, no, I want to, he bluntly said, he goes, I want to come in, I want to do my job, and I want to go home. And I was like, okay, no further. And that was one of the points when I realized that some people they want to come in and do their job. But if you don't ask and you try to move them, like you said, you're going to swap places or put them somewhere where they're not comfortable. That's when all of a sudden problems happen. And then it ends up, they become disgruntled. And then they're not what I thought they were, when really it was you, because you didn't ask those questions. You weren't forward and straight with them and saying, what is it that you want out of this position, this career, your life that I have control over? And I think of that same exact person. Then I had others, the same I had cashiers who were like, put me in the kitchen, give me a knife, I want to learn how to do this. And they continuously kept moving because they wanted to learn and grow. It's just fascinating, human psychology. That's a whole nother ballgame
for another day. And I love reading books on it because I think it's really fascinating. But there's so many examples of this type of thing happening over and over in many ways, where at the end of the day, people are instilling their own beliefs on someone else versus just asking. And to me, that's the key learning, is don't project your own biases onto others. Have the honest conversation instead.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard.
Especially
when you want, like you said, when your personality is improve, you want people to improve, and some people just don't. Okay, two other things I had on my list while you were talking. Scaling recipes at magnitude. Now, I've done some scaling of recipes, and we're talking going from developmental of, my batch size was like 12. And again, for context, this was in more of the education setting. So we're working on like a 12 that I know I could then scale up to potentially 200, 250. Or you're talking about scaling the tons of product. What is the math? What obstacles, what logistics go through that when you're wanting to scale up? And how much does a small variant change. If you're like, okay, instead of 2 grams, it's 3 grams, how big of a change does that make to a recipe?
Yeah, great. This is a really fun part of my career, actually, working in category engineering, where my whole job was to scale these things from R&D. I'm going to answer your last question first, which is 2 grams to 3 grams. Sounds easy to maybe someone cooking a recipe. That's a very small amount. But to me in a factory, that's a 50% increase. That's massive, massive. Because it's about percentages in a factory, because you're at big scale. So if someone comes to me and says, I want to increase the percentage of mustard in the mayonnaise recipe. And I'd be like, okay, no problem. 1, 2%. Like, what do you think? They're like, no, I want to up it by 50%. Like, no, we need investment. We need new people. We need all these different things. We can't do it. There's no way. I need all this stuff. So the first and hardest part is like wrapping your mind around the fact that like, it's not about how much is in your recipe at home. It's about what percentage change you have to manage in the factory and the variance with which you have to manage it. Another example is like, actually, I'll use the mustard again because it's a great example. We were putting in, I'll make it up, let's say 2 10-pound pails of mustard per batch. Let's say that's how much we were making. Well, those 10-pound pails are specially made to only hold 10 pounds because mustard is hazardous in high volumes. Another fun fact.
I did not know
Because
that.
mustard gas, which I'm sure you've heard of from World War I, well, all it is actually high volume mustard. Like mustard naturally emits this noxious gas, a fume that is dangerous and hazardous to health in high enough volumes. Your mustard at home is nowhere even close to that level. Never going to be close. But when you scale mustard, you find out I'm handling a hazardous material, one that can actually hurt people if they breathe it in. And so we had to create these special 10-pound pails that they filled in a special special container in a containment area where the operators weren't at any risk of safety issues. They'd fill it, they'd take that 10-pound pail, and it fits specifically on the batch making apparatus. You basically clip it on, it dumps it in without any air getting out. You do 2 of those, you take them back, clean them, and then refill them. So now you come to me and you say, okay, Pedro, I want to add 2 pounds of mustard to the recipe. I'm like, well, I have 2 pails and they're both full. Sorry. Like, that's just not how we're built to operate. So like, it's another example of like, 1, we're now handling a hazardous material, so we can't do it easily. 2, we already built this batching system to do it. So it's a big hurdle with scaling. Another one is just the variability with what you can have in a recipe. So a lot of people don't think about, we're going to keep going back to mayonnaise because I love mayonnaise, but I'll give you an example. The amount of vinegar that's in a mayonnaise, you vary that if you're making it at home by, I don't know, maybe a couple grams or maybe like a percent or 2, just naturally. And okay, it tastes a little more vinegary, a little less vinegary. Well, in the factory, it's continuous process. So we're just basically there's a mixer tank. You're always putting vinegar in, you're always putting eggs in, you're always putting oil in, and it's just constantly mixing with salt and some other stuff. And out comes mayonnaise out the bottom. Well, if you're constantly putting vinegar in and your pump catches or something like, you drive your car and you slam the brakes and it like has a little slosh or something like that, that can affect that batch of mayonnaise. But if you're running continuously, how do you know if it affects it? So now you have to start thinking, okay, if it affects it by 1, 2%, do we need to stop the line? No. If it affects it by 5%, will people recognize that flavor difference? Maybe. So then we actually have to test the variability as you scale up a recipe because R&D doesn't know, right? Like they're testing specific recipes. They're not testing like what happens if a recipe swings between 2 areas, right? Like goes back and forth across the line. They don't really know because you don't naturally think of that. And so we would actually test some of those things in the factory. We would run the vinegar high, then run it low, then run it high, and run these, and then do a sensory panel to say, how's the mayonnaise taste now? Good, bad, whatever. Did people notice? If no, okay, here's our range. And if it ever goes out of that range, we set an alarm, stop the line, test the product. And then the last and another important piece of scaling up is that in some cases, we would run 400, 500 jars per minute, which, yeah, first is like crazy. Then you can't look at all of those jars. So like nobody's putting their eyes on every jar. There's no way. Nor can you test them all, nor do you want to test them all. So we would pick one every 30 minutes or so. You test like the actual composition of it, make sure it's the right stuff. But then you also have to put cameras in place to like monitor specific points of breakdowns in the mayonnaise. So is it sealed all the way, for example? Is it the right weight? Did we overfill? Did we underfill? Is there dirt on the jar or something like that? So you set up cameras to start to monitor those things. And so you think about now, like if I'm not making it by hand, the fact that a human's eyes are on it, you're going to catch so much more than when nobody ever looks at it. And so you have to automate ways in to do things that humans would naturally do, which is something that a lot of people don't think about because it's just your instinct. Like, oh, that jar's a little dirty. I'll just clean it off. That's fine, which is great when you're slow. But when it's 500 jars a minute, no way.
It's just hard to fathom. I'm literally trying to imagine like 500 jars of mayonnaise going through a line in a minute, and how fast that is loading and out the door, and then obviously into distribution. And not just that's one container, right? There's umpteen sizes when you go to the store. There's the gallon, there's food service gallon pails. You've got the smaller ones. You've got the squeeze jars. So between all of these, trying to keep track of all of them. And we're going to get into some automation and AI here in a little bit, because that, I think, is a big piece, especially in the food industry. The last thing I had from your time at Unilever is bringing a product from, was it Latin or the America? What'd you call them?
Central America.
Central Americas into the U.S. What does regulations look like on that? Is everything being produced in those countries? Are you bringing still in products just like it's done in America and exported out? What's that? What did that whole process look like?
The process of, let's say, making a product in a foreign country and bringing it in is very similar to the process of making it in the U.S. and selling in the U.S., with one major caveat, which is you have to get through customs. But otherwise, the factory that you make it in, so for example, in Unilever, the factory we made it in Central America had to meet all of the FDA standards that you would meet in the United States. All the ingredients have to also meet those same FDA standards. And in that case, we were importing tomatoes from California, from Chile. You could import from India. Like, there's all sorts of places to get tomatoes for this tomato sauce. And all those places had to qualify for FDA standards. So US, FDA, food safety, all those types of standards. One of the difficulties for most companies when they start to look at something like that is it's, let's call it self-proclaimed, that I am meeting all of these standards. And the FDA has a right to audit you at any point. So they can fly from DC and just show up at your factory in Central America whenever they want. And so that's sometimes a big hurdle for those factories. If anybody's thinking about sourcing abroad, the first question I always ask is, are you FSVP certified, which is Food Safety Verification Program. And that act got put in place a little while ago. Basically, it's saying me as a factory, I meet all the FDA standards to produce in a foreign country. And those standards are the same as producing in the United States. Therefore, I'm okay to ship to the US. Once you claim that, like, a lot of things get a lot easier. Now, the process then of loading it and bringing it to the US, you had to put it on a shipping container. You had to get that container to the United States border. You then have to clear customs. You have to show them all the documentation that you are certified. Your label has to be compliant for the US. It can't be a label compliant for Central America. You can sticker on it. So you can like put a sticker over the label and say now it's in English instead of Spanish or whatever else, and the nutrition facts match the US standards. But it needs to be compliant when it enters the United States. And that's usually a tricky one for people to do, because that means you have to get it compliant before it, not necessarily before it hits the border, but before it actually comes in or gets recognized as on United States ground. There's some ways to do that in like free trade zones in the US and stuff where you can sticker it once it arrives on shore, but essentially that's the case for it. And then once you clear customs, you have to have an importer on record. So basically the person that the FDA can call and say, you're responsible for this product. So let's say, God forbid, someone got sick from eating your food. On the back of every product, there is a US importer on record for anything that's imported. So you can go to any packaged goods, turn it over, and it'll say imported by blah, 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 whoever it is, even if it's not the brand on the front. That's the person who's accountable to someone getting sick to that product in the United States.
That's what that means.
That's exactly what that means. So the FDA knows who to call when something goes wrong. And if anything happens, they call them. Usually that person, the importer on record, has an agreement with the person who made the product too that says, we're mutually accountable. We do this together. We meet all these requirements. 90% of the time, that's the case. But that's exactly what that means. And that's the other big hurdle that a lot of companies have to go through. If there is not an importer on record that you're hiring to do that, you can hire people to do this for you. Then you have to open a US entity to be able to be that person, or be responsible even as a foreign entity. So it can be complicated beyond that. What we did at Unilever International, at least, is we would find distributors that were in the United States to do those things for us and help us through all of that. And they would put their name on the back of it, which means you have a very strong relationship with that person.
Yeah.
Whoever it may be, because they are shaking hands with you and they are going to be under the government umbrella and gun if something were to go wrong. And so you have to really build a strong partnership when you start to think about who your importer on record is too.
Yeah, it's like the cosigner on a loan.
Exactly like a cosigner.
if shit hits the fan, guess what? You're on the hook for whatever goes wrong.
Exactly.
I have to ask, because I learned supply chain in a different way. Obviously, it was in through operations, but COVID. I know we're almost 6 years removed out of it, but what was your experience through all this? Right, you've got this massive going on. and then COVID hits. Well, obviously the world I put shut down, but there were a lot of places that did not shut down and had to still keep producing. I'm assuming
Hmm.
being in these factories, like you guys had to still produce product. I mean, there was still product on the shelf.
Not only that, people ate more mayonnaise than they ever eat in their life. Like, to be honest. So I was working in the mayonnaise factory at the time. We set volume records that year of COVID because people went home and they bought mayonnaise and they put it on everything because that's just what people do. I don't know why. Just like toilet paper shot through the roof, mayonnaise shot through the roof, especially Hellmann's. And so I was in the factory every single day. I actually never had time off during COVID. There's some funny parts like what I just mentioned. There's some sad parts like when my grandpa passed away, I couldn't go to his funeral because then I would have had to miss too many days at the factory because I would have had to quarantine when I got home. And so like some really shitty stuff happened during COVID. It was also during that time, it was during some of the race riots happened in Chicago too. So not only were we dealing with COVID
Mm.
and quarantine protocols, but also we were in Little Village in Chicago where there were riots, actual riots going on outside. And so there were moments in the factory we didn't feel safe both leaving the factory or safe in the factory because we had to have very specific protocols in place to manage our COVID. It was hard, I'll be honest. It was one of the hardest, most formative years of my life because I had some responsibility for the safety of the people in the factory. So like me and the safety manager split some of the roles and I was responsible for all the contractors coming in. So I was responsible for setting the processes to make sure that anyone entering the factory was safe, both from a health and safety standpoint and from a COVID standpoint. So can we contact trace them? Have they been quarantined enough? Have they been tested recently enough? And I was deciding on those processes. And I'm not a doctor. This is another one of those situations where I had to find someone skilled, more skilled than me in determining what they should be. And man, I just went into work every day, like 5, 6 days a week for forever. And it was yeah, it was really tough. It was really tough to see my friends who were staying home every day and complaining about like, oh, I've just been stuck in my room all day. And I'm like, I just had a 12-hour shift at the factory wearing an N95 mask, having barriers put up around me and the operators, trying to make enough mayonnaise to feed you and your family. Meanwhile, 3 operators were out sick today because they have COVID. And oh, I was standing next to them yesterday, so now I might have COVID and on and on and on. A couple of things I'm really proud of during that time. Number one, I can confidently say that the amount of COVID transition at that factory during that time was incredibly low, lower than even going to the store or anything else. Like the risk that we reduced in the factory of all of the operators there was incredible that we were able to keep running the way we did. And the second piece was like with the difficulty of all the overtime and everything that everybody had to work, we still set records for producing enough mayonnaise for the world to literally eat. And as weird as it is to say making mayonnaise was noble at the time, it felt noble because we were making food for people to eat and it's what they wanted and it's what they needed. And they had to be at home and we had to go in to make sure that they could sit at home and be safe. And so we did. And it wasn't without losses. I mean, during that time, we had 2 people in the factory actually pass away, one from COVID, one from other causes. And this is a 180 person, 200 person team. And so that was another like just grief on top of all of this too for everybody in the factory. And so it was very much like riding a roller coaster every single day.
What pushed you through it? What got you through? If you're working 5, 6 days a week, continuous for what, couple years? What pushes you to get through that, to have enough perseverance? I mean, a lot of people just break and they be like, I'm done. I can't do this. Especially something like your grandfather passing away and completely missing that. That
Hmm.
has to be incredibly tough. So what got you through it?
I think this is one I haven't reflected on in a while, actually. So thanks for bringing it back up. It was a good time. I think what got me through it was the team I was working with. And actually, I hope anybody on that team listens to this. So hi to everyone at the Hellman's factory from from the COVID times. Nick, if you're listening, you're doing a great job. Uh, they they really like working with people who also had that energy. We propped each other up. Uh, I remember moments when my peers broke down at the factory with me there in tears, not able to do the next day, and I helped them. And then the next day, I was in the same state and they helped me. And so actually, we propped each other up so that we could get through it together. And any hard moment like that I've looked back on in my life, it's the people I surround myself with that keep me going and I keep them going. At the end of the day, it really is the people that are around you that make you who you are. And I was around some really, really great people during that time. and we really got through it together, and we're still close even after all those years.
Kudos to you and all those around, because I was one of
Yeah.
those mayonnaise eaters during that time frame. So I much appreciated having the things that, like, during that time you didn't realize like how many things you took for granted. I mean, having a food background, it made things a little easier. Like when ground beef, when no one could find ground beef, I'm like, just buy beef and you just grind it up. Like I just put it through the
Yeah,
grinder,
yeah.
and I'm like,
There's another way.
everyone's freaking out waiting for the butcher to come out with some ground beef, and I'm just buying whatever. It's 10 times cheaper to buy the chuck roast and the top rounds, and I'm just like, all right, let me just throw this through the grinder and I got ground beef. And people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, what? That's all you do? And they just take it for granted because they don't know how to do it, and some of the skills that you develop. And again, mayonnaise, not that it's hard, it's just one of those things that, like, don't want to take the time unless you have a burr mixer to get the right amount of yolks and slowly drizzle in your oil and all that. But okay, now you moved to Mexico, out of all places.
Yep.
Chicago, Mexico. Yeah, same thing. At least the same time zone. At least you didn't have to make an adjustment.
Yeah, that was helpful
there. And I want to bring up the topic of nearshoring. Maybe if you could explain what that term is, and then we'll dig into that a little bit more.
So nearshoring is a loose term for bringing production closer to the consumer, wherever that consumer may be. Nearshoring, I've seen it used in multiple contexts. Normally in the United States, people say nearshoring as in they're making a product in a foreign country and they want to bring it inside the United States. But I've also seen nearshoring be used in the US to say, I'm making a product in a foreign country and I want to bring it to North America, where it's made in Canada or made in Mexico, because there are a lot of trade agreements between Mexico, Canada, and the US, or have been in the past. And typically people do this to better react to changes for consumers, to bring costs down, or to have a more efficient supply chain in another way, which is like maybe the supplies of some of the food ingredients are in the United States or in Mexico already, and so they want to bring the factory closer there instead of shipping, let's say, tomatoes from Chile to China to make a sauce to bring it back to the United States. You can make that a lot more efficient in other ways, and those usually end up making it cheaper or more resilient, or many other benefits too.
Yeah, and you've heard a lot. I mean, that's been one of the big topics with, and we won't go into politics, but like getting stuff, made back here. But, and companies are saying they're going to do it. Are these false pledges? Do you think companies are actually, like, boots on the ground actually making this happen? Or are they just hey, this is the way it is right now, so we're going to say it and then we're going to keep doing our practices?
My experience, two parts. Part one is people probably don't realize how much is already made in the United States, because companies don't do a great job of advertising it. I think they should. That's a different story. But many, like I mentioned, mayonnaise, Stubb bar soap, all these things, Unilever and P&G and all the other big CPG companies and food companies are likely making a lot of products in the United States already that you don't realize. Now, why are they doing it there? It's cheaper, it's faster, the infrastructure's here, it's higher quality, it's easier to manage, and so they keep it here. They only outsource or take it offshore when there's a good value proposition for it. So why move production to Mexico when you have it in the United States and it's stable? Well, if Mexico's cheaper and that's where the ingredients are already, there's a bunch of farming for avocados and things like that in Mexico that you just can't get anywhere else, that you're going to have to import anyways. But let's move it closer to there. Then it becomes cheaper, it becomes easier to react. You can manage changes a lot better, on and on and on. And so that's what I see companies evaluating now. So when you think, okay, the tariffs went up, now it's more expensive to import food. Well, any company, any rational CFO would say, okay, well, let's balance that new tariff against the cost of making it in the US versus the cost of making it there. And then any supply chain expert would say, okay, let's balance the risk of making it in the US versus making it there. And the risks change based on every product. I have seen almost every company I've talked to, actually, since tariffs went into place, have reevaluated the best place to make their product. What's been hard for them is when the goalposts move, when the tariff changes,
Right.
or when the production facilities aren't there and all of a sudden someone's going to come in and make an investment, because these changes are not fast, especially if you're doing a high volume product. It takes sometimes 6 months, sometimes 2 years, to maybe even more, to bring some of these things to nearshoring. And so they're long-term decisions, and they are very difficult ones because you're making guesses in a lot of those categories that I just mentioned, because you just can't predict all of the demand that consumers may have or change along the way.
How do companies navigate cultural logistical bridges that come along with it, right? You're producing in one place and all of a sudden you move it. Let's say it's an Asian culture and maybe they speak English, but now all of a sudden you bring it to Central America because you want it in North America. Now you've got all those cultural differences and everything that comes along with it. how are they dealing with those type of things?
Yeah. So to deal with cultural differences, especially in a supply chain, first and foremost, like the language of business is English in general. And so I see pretty much any culture across the world. In order to work in a cross-border supply chain, you have to be able to speak English in general. So if anyone's considering it, like you can feel good about that part of it. But navigating the cultural differences is much harder. So maybe they're speaking English, but it sounds like a different language. Not because you can't understand the words, because it means something quite literally different. And for me, the fastest way to bridge those boundaries was to find someone locally that I trusted and explain it to me. And so, for example, moving here to Mexico, I'm taking Spanish lessons because I want to learn Spanish. And, it's something I'm passionate about. I love learning. But I also got a Spanish teacher who's from Mexico. And so he's my resource now because I've kind of made friends with him. And I ask him all the time, is this a Mexican culture thing or is this just weird? And so, like, having that person to just be like, is this a cultural thing? Am I doing this right? Can you gut check this for me? For example, and I'll give you a weird example actually. Here in Mexico, people, when they say thank you, like let's say in the US, you're crossing the street and like someone stops the car for you and they like give you the hand and say thank you. In Mexico, you go like this. And and the first time I saw it, I was like, what is it? Like, are they flipping me off? Like, what does that mean? So I asked him, I was like, culturally, what does that mean? He's like, oh, it means thank you. And I'm like, oh my God, I've worked with people in Mexico before and they did that to me. Like even on camera, they were like, goodbye. And I was like, I almost got offended by it. So I started asking the question of someone I trusted. And so I think first and foremost is to be human and just ask the question of like, what
Yeah.
does this mean?
Yeah.
The second part of it is like, if you don't have someone you trust there, build trust and a relationship. Talk to them like a human. Don't just email 1,000 times hoping for something different. Schedule a phone call. Stay up late. Wake up early. Get on the phone and talk to your fellow human.
Yeah.
And
Right.
all of a sudden, cultural boundaries break down so quickly because you pick up the phone, you see them in video. The technology has made this very easy. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on video with someone in Singapore or in Thailand or Philippines or wherever, and we can mutually agree that this is crappy for both of us to be up early or up late. And then we smile and then everything's fine. It's the pick up the phone culture, I think, is the one that should be globally recognized and the first step for anyone to cross those boundaries.
Yeah, for sure the first step. And then second step, in my opinion, like go visit the culture.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of getting to go to Italy earlier this year and
Nice.
been working with the Italians for quite some time on a product. And some of the things they did, it didn't make sense. I didn't understand why they were doing these things. But then when you go and you're actually immersed in the culture and you just, to your point, why do you do this? And they tell you, you're just like, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense. I thought it was something different. And then you just
Yeah.
kind of catch on to the norms so that way you have a better understanding of why they do what they do and just the way that they act. In Italy, I think it's in August or September, they shut down for like 3 weeks.
Yep,
No,
they do.
no one works.
Yep.
Like I
Yep.
was like,
Not even at all.
nothing. Like you send an email, you're not getting a reply back until
Yeah.
the day they come back. And obviously, depending
Uh-huh.
on how important you are and if they want to respond to you that day. But it blew my mind. Like, why? What do you mean you just shut down for 3 weeks? Like we don't work. Okay. But then when you see the culture and you realize how connected they are as people, you realize
Mhm.
that it's probably very important because that's just who they are in general. And then there's just some things that you can make fun of and lighthearted. And one of the big jokes that me and another chef do now is they say ciao all day,
They do.
every day.
For everything.
Ciao for everything.
Everything, right?
Hello, thank you, goodbye, see ya. It's
Yeah.
ciao.
It's just ciao.
So,
Yeah.
but when I'd say bye, all of a sudden they'd be like ciao, 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 or they'd say it multiple times. I'm like, so they're saying goodbye, 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 and it's just no. That's just what they say. It means bye one time. So one of our big jokes when we get the phone is we just will say ciao, 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 ciao until one of us just hangs up the phone because that's just a thing.
I love it.
But you mentioned like I want to know about like the business pace of like Mexico versus Chicago. Chicago hustle bustle. What's it like down in Mexico? And I say Chicago, New York because it's hustle and bustle city. I
Yeah.
lived in middle of nowhere
Me
where
too.
it's slow. But what's big city comparison?
Both cities are chaotic, noisy, crazy, fun, like all those things. So many different cultures, mishmash of people and approaches and all those things. I think Chicago and Mexico City share that. I would liken Mexico City closer to New York. Mexico City is actually more people than New York from the fact that it's the sprawl that's there and just how big it really can be. But then the like working culture is a bit different. Mexico is much more community first, almost in everything they do. They're community first, family first type culture. They don't do the big shutdown that Italy or Spain do. Spain does the same thing, by the way, for 3-4 weeks in the summer. They're just off. Mexico doesn't do that necessarily. But when there's a family event or anything like that, they're out. Like that is it. They draw the line. But what's interesting about their culture too is they work very hard. Like Mexicans down here work extremely hard, especially in the professional setting where, 7, 8, 9 a.m. in the morning till 6, 7 p.m. with a long lunch like Spanish do. A long, delicious lunch at that. It's a big meal, and late in the day, like 2, 3 p.m. But they do work very hard and they're very dedicated to the groups around them. And I see that different than Chicago or New York, where it's very individualistic. Like I have my thing I need to do that I need to accomplish and I'm going to go accomplish it. Like if you're there to help me, great. Like we'll go together. But otherwise, like I've just got it covered. In Mexico, it's like, no, we will stay until we all get our stuff done and we'll figure out a way to do it together. And so I see that as one of the big differences. I also see a general work difference in culture in Mexico of like, we're going to work enough to feed our family and then we're good. Like that's about where we'll stop, and generalizing a lot, but it's that community first, family first type mentality of like, it's not a work first mentality like it is in Chicago or New York or a lot of the big cities in the US. It's family community first. And so that also means that their dedication to the job ends when their dedication to their family is fulfilled. And so you see a different approach to career planning, to opportunities, to development that stem into that. Now, I want to put a disclaimer on it. I'm heavily generalizing. So not every case is the same. And I've seen many, many very ambitious Mexicans that have found their way to many, many different business opportunities. But that is what I've seen as a bit of a difference.
Sounds a lot like a kitchen if you really think about it. A lot of kitchens, we're all here until we get the job done. Like no one's going home early because their station's clean. It's I'm done. Go help the next station. Go help the next station. Okay, we all clock out. We all go home. Sounds very, very similar, and it makes a lot of sense. And maybe some of that culture bled into. I mean, if you think about the kitchens, a lot of them are filled with Mexicans. I mean, that's just people listening from the general public that aren't in this industry. They're blown away when you're like, oh, I went to the Asian restaurant. Well, depending on what that Asian restaurant is, if it's not a like smaller or like mom and pop type place, guess what? It's Mexicans back there in the kitchen and they're cooking your food, or Italian. It doesn't matter what cuisine it is. That's who's back in the kitchen. Hardest working people, one of the hardest working people I've ever been around, for sure. I think they elevate people in the kitchen because I don't know. It's just that camaraderie and you want to get shit done. Okay, so now
it's the community part of it. They bring the community together, and it's community first. That's what I love about it so much.